Have you ever heard, of course you've heard that. Like we've all heard that, right? When someone says, "Oh, I couldn't help it." I remember the last time at the movie theater, I was saying that to myself, and cognitive attention training isn't about being a perfect human being. It's about observing your own mind as it's occurring so that when things show up that aren't beneficial, they're not productive, you can do something with it, right? That's pretty much the premise. So there was a moment at the movie theater when I said this. I was like, well, I just couldn't help my, and I didn't even finish the sentence because I saw it as it was occurring, and that little voice in my mind, the essence of devil's advocate was like, well, why can't you? Well, what do you mean you can't? What do you mean you can't help yourself? What what is this? You telling yourself that you can't help yourself means that you absolutely can. Otherwise, you wouldn't have recognized it in the first place. Do you see what I mean? So I have a mind that just won't let me hustle myself, or even, of course, then in turn, I can't hustle other people because my mind won't let me hustle myself. So, you know, throughout my life when I was, because remember, I was introduced to mindfulness in maybe 2000. I started to embody it in 2010. So I had 10 years of putting my foot here, putting my foot there, and like dipping my toes into these different things. And then in 2010, it clicked. It's like, wait a second, your practice doesn't work if you don't do it. And I'm like, it's true. Why not do it all the time? Because I can't. Well, no, now wait a second. That's not true. You know that I can't is just something you're telling yourself. Maybe you can't right now, right in the second, because you haven't practiced, but there's no ultimate, there's no absolute you can't. Do you see what I mean? And so that's what led me to embodiment is there was just no good reason that I could tell myself why I couldn't do this all the time.
But the fact that you were exploring it for 10 years first, before you got to that point, um, is a fact. And so in our case, we are we are experiencing it now without the 10 years of trial and error, of learning, of examples that prove that it is possible. So those 10 years don't exist necessarily for us. We start at 10 years in, effectively. And so maybe that's why it seems advanced. When you go from a place where you're not aware or you haven't been aware to a place of, wait a minute, all of a sudden I'm aware, I see this now. But we do it in a minute or a year or two, not 10.
That's
Maybe
true.
that's what makes it feel um, advanced.
Maybe. Yeah. But ultimately it's not. I mean, I think so that's what I think the consensus that we could come to. And then the Bridge Mindfulness System, it's still in its infantile stages here. This is just another creative project of mine. It has no end goal. I'm not doing it for any reasons necessarily, but I think I have the capstone to it. So I know where this practice ends in terms of, delivery of a practice. The practice itself, you know, you can continue to find new ways to interact with it, and that's perfect. But in terms of the Bridge Mindfulness System, there's only six techniques. How long can I talk about six techniques? Quite a while, actually, but
A really
not
long time.
forever.
A
I know.
really, a
Yeah.
really long time. A really long time.
Yeah.
A really long time because, well, um, I think that trying to convince anyone that embodiment is essential is futile and counterproductive, I think.
Sure.
And Gene should know this because I've been trying to talk him into it, and he's been playing devil's advocate with me since I've been trying to talk him into it. But obviously, there's some aspect of it that resonates because he's here. And so I think what we remember is that there is relief in practicing, even if we're not practicing all the time. When we are practicing, we can feel the relief. It can be felt. And so even with a logical, scientific, deductive mind that doesn't believe in woo-woo, that relief is felt. And so, gee, if I do this more, I feel better more of the time. And my life, especially when you've got life-threatening challenges, your life is worth it. It's worth it. My time on the planet is worth spending consciously in that, with more of that feeling of relief and connection and the virtues of what the practice brings. So, and that can only be felt by practicing. And I have found personally, people come to me more to ask me about my practice or for advice, only because they feel some suffering and they want some relief from their suffering. And I can't tell them how to relieve their suffering, but I can tell them what I do. And the bridge for me to them in that conversation is when I can observe when they do it, when they are practicing and they just don't call it this, they don't call it tea, or they don't call it the bridge, or they don't call it whatever we're calling it at the time. They're not using our terminology to define what they've done. I point out to them, I've watched you do this, so you can't bullshit me. I know, I've seen you do hard things, and this is the way that I observed you do it. And that is what I do. That is what you're telling me is impossible. You're telling me it's impossible to do that in this circumstance. Listen, how you feel and how upset you feel or how much struggle you feel, all of it is valid because they're your feelings. I can't invalidate anything you're saying. All I'm saying is if you're looking for relief, this is the way I've watched you do it. Here are the principles at play, and here are some suggestions about, ways in which you can move forward. By you here are the basics. Here's the skeleton of the practice. What things you choose, as Ida was just saying, we have things that we do in our daily life that we find we can be mindful about, that we enjoy. Everyone's rituals or practices are different. But when you're talking to a young mom and you say breakfast with your children, how did you get through breakfast with your children this morning? Did you rush them through it so they could catch the bus? Or did you, spell something with the alphabets? Was there a moment, were the moments of connection when you were brushing their hair or helping them choose their clothes or whatever? I don't know. I just pull something. With mothers and children, it's easy because they'll stop complaining, stop being the devil's advocate, stop, and it brings them right to their heart space when you talk about those moments with their children. And then illustrate what principles at play are when they're doing that. They can't be any more present than in those moments. Those are very present, mindful moments, and the principles at play during that and what is felt as a result of practicing can be illustrated to them. And or older people who are taking care of their elderly parents as they age, which is very similar to the child example. Those kinds of things. I've watched colleagues and friends go through that, and those are the things that I'll bring to their attention, or struggles with students they've had or whatever, and how I watched them traverse those things with elegance. And we all have those moments. And and it's with being a father and a grandfather or a sibling or a husband or whatever moments you've seen them have those moments of connection. That's where the light bulb goes off for me. If I'm trying, I can't teach somebody about coming to earnest class and embodying it 24 hours a day and why that's important. But when you can illustrate a snapshot of a time where you've watched them, seen them in a connected, fully present, embodied moment or time that they've traversed. When you traversed this difficult time, when was it easier and when was it harder? And the principles at play, isn't it worth expanding? My cousin calls me. We have regular calls about, all right, I got to do this, and this person is getting under my, some battleground. She wants to call and talk to me about some battleground she's having, and she wants to just hash it out so she can go enter this meeting or this argument she had with her husband or whatever battleground. And this is the stuff we talk about, and it's all principle based. It's all about, she knows that I know her. She wants me to be her voice of power for 10 minutes so she can hear it again. And so she can get out of her thinking mind or her overthinking mind or her validation of why she should be so pissed off at this other person, or the revenge that she wants to get, or the unfairness of it all, or whatever fist up at the sky thing she's feeling. She wants to just say it out loud, be validated, and then recognize that it's not worth spending her focus on that, and where her practice is going to get her through this more elegantly. And it's really, that's where the practice comes in those real life situations. So when you say, how long can I talk about this? How long can I teach it? You can teach it, you can talk about it and teach it all day long, every day, because it's just the way people are navigating their lives and want it to be more smooth. I think everyone has points in their life where it can be illustrated or reflected upon why it was easy and why it was difficult. And that's the practice. That's this. So just knowing that when they're in this space of balance, life navigates easier, and I feel relief and I feel more connection, and I can, and I know that I'm capable of it. I remember that I'm capable of it, and I remember that I'm responsible for it, and that all I need to do is move those pieces around and remember it. I will get through this as well. Or not. You don't want to, you want to have that confrontation, you want to have that argument, go have it. And then see how you feel afterwards. And then, we can talk about it again if you want. How'd it go? So how did that meeting go? And how did you do it? And most of the time, she'll come back to me. It's like my cousin will call me again, and it's our debriefing meeting. She goes, oh, you know how it went. It went just fine. I got my head straight. I went in. I enjoyed it. And I was able to show them the things that I was trying to convince them that were going to go wrong, that those were the bumpy parts, without having an I told you so or a confrontation, or we got through it and it was successful, and it could have been more successful or it could have been less successful, but we got through it, and it was fine. And I don't know, that's life, right? That's all of it. We're not just in this alone, we're in it all together. It's what we do in class. It's what we do in class for each other. It's what we've done in class for the years that I've been here, is listen to Ida's stories and Jerry's stories and Lisa's stories, and how the practice applies. And that's what we're still doing. So
Yeah.
how long can you teach it? I mean, how long can we talk about it? For as long as the world is evolving and changing, and we are as well, that's how long we can talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Donna. Okay. You definitely answered how long we could talk about it. Forever. Okay. I should have grabbed the coffee a second ago, but I'm going to grab my last cup of coffee real quick, and then we can reflect on that a little bit, because I mean, I do think you're right. I do think that we can talk about it forever. I have personal principles. Number one is, well, not in any particular order, not like this is most important, but when it comes to sharing my practice, number one, I don't sell my personal experience as if it's replicatable. Does that make sense? So
Makes sense. Neither do I. That's
yeah,
why I was saying I try to, point out to people what they've done
principles.
and how I've
Exactly.
watched them do it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and you're definitely good at that too. So, um, but that's so, that not necessarily in relation to anyone or anything else, but it is a reason why the bridge practice itself is finite. How we share it is infinite. How we get into it, and because ultimately I made a practice that can be finite and infinite at the same time. Like I'm like, that's pretty cool. So, and that's something that I wanted to do. I wanted it to have an end and a beginning, but also be something that can continue to have added depth as more people do it. So
Well,
that's
you've done that, and you continue to
exactly.
do that, Ernest.
Yep, yep. And then so when we get into hydrostasy, that is what we were, because Donna used words like peace and the space that we're creating and the relief. Well, relief is a feeling. Like if Gene has 100 pounds on his shoulders and I take it off, he's going to feel relief. If that 100 pounds doesn't go back on his shoulders, how long does he continue to feel relief?
But
Hey,
that's the practice. So
it is
when
the
he
practice.
feels
Yeah.
it again and you go, okay, you want to go have that, you want to hang on to that. How is it serving you?
Mhm.
And when I watch you do this, you got through that really elegantly. So,
Oh yeah,
you can be the devil's advocate all you want, but you're bullshitting somebody who's watched you do it. So you can do it or not do it. This is your life.
mm,
But do you want to do it with relief or do you want to do it with stress? I mean, that's really the choice.
true, true. And I think Gene got where I was going. I see what you're saying, Donna. But relief is a relative thing, and that's where hydrostasy comes in. Because hydrostasy is, what do we do now? What do we do when we're not really creating these dramas anymore? What do we do when there is more space? How do we begin to engage it in a way that doesn't feel like we're going back and forth, interacting with the world, interacting with the infinite? How can we do both at the same time? And then ultimately, the way that I would capstone this practice is when we get into mindfulness-based behavioral change and behavioral therapy, because it's a different way of approaching our behavior. And I know a lot of people want to say, "Oh, I get it. Oh, I get it." I know, I understand. I know why people think that, mindfulness-based behavioral therapy is easy to understand, because it is. But then again, the moment that you judge your behavior, the moment that you are thinking about it being otherwise, you are no longer mindful. And that's the crux. That's where embodiment is almost necessary for it to actually have an effect on your everyday behavior, everyday things. And I'll give some examples of that, and I'll give examples of how I'm putting it together in the practice. And then, so now hydrostasy offers something for somebody to do. What do we do? Well, we create, silly. You enjoy what is there to enjoy, and you maximize when things aren't going your way, when there's things, to adapt to. I would definitely say that if I lived in Florida, a Category 4 hurricane on my doorstep is not desirable. I would say that particular day, things are not going my way per se. It's just a way of looking at it. I'm going to fill up my coffee, and then we can continue the discussion. Be right back. All right. No coffee left. Shayna drank it all. That's fine. What were we talking about?
I miss Shayna.
She's over here. Oh, she's not in the group right now though. She's here though. Yeah, you got kicked out. I don't see your name. Are you still listening? You were in there a minute ago.
Ernest, did you kick her out because she drank the coffee?
No, no, I just found that out.
Subconsciously, did you do it? Oh, that's right. You
I
don't have
wouldn't
a
know.
subconscious. Everything's super conscious.
Well, no, I just don't know. Subconscious is just it has baggage. Remember, the word subconscious has baggage.
I know. I was just
Yeah.
teasing. I was
Oh,
teasing.
okay. There's above and below recognition.
Yes. So you threw her out below
Below
recognition.
recognition, I don't know. I wouldn't know that. I would need a witness or a video recording or something to
Well,
prove
I'm
that.
calling it. I'm calling it that.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. We started by saying, we started talking about how the practice, to some, it does look complex. You know, somebody wanted me to present what I do as advanced mindfulness, while they offer something that would be more like mindfulness-based stress relief. So I get it. That's typically the way that we begin with this anyway. When you begin with basic mindfulness, the only thing you have to do in the practice is check in, come back. You just keep coming back to the moment throughout the day. That's the entirety of your practice. And then also some tools maybe when things aren't going well, you know, like paying attention to your breathing, or it depends. Maybe a little abdominal breathing is appropriate because you're starting to have a response to stimuli and you want to help balance that response through breath. Uh, that's fine. So that's where we typically begin. That's, you know, we build on that. We don't ever stop doing that. That's another thing I love about this practice that we've created, is it's not, you know, Gene is never going to forget basic mindfulness if he's doing anything else, any other part of it. So it's not going to be one of those things where it's like, oh, let me get my notes. I don't know what we're doing with basic mindfulness. I gotta check with Donna. No, like of course we all know what basic mindfulness is because it's required for everything else that we're doing. So it layers on top of one another. So then we acknowledge everything Donna and Jean have said so far, and we go into counterbalance. We acknowledge that we're going to forget more than remember. So this practice acknowledges that, and it can help a person move forward in the embodiment of it. I do admit though, everything is with the intention of embodiment, because that's the third pillar, that's the golden rule. Where is my mind and did I put it there? The answer is either yes or no. The practice is learning to make it yes all of the time. So counterbalance leads to what we call warrior training. Warrior training is exactly everything we've been doing. It's just categorized now in a way that is more geared towards embodiment, even geared more towards remembering more than we forget. But it still allows for the dynamic of forgetting, because that's how memory works. And then we practice, and then we practice, and then we practice, and we forget, and we practice, and we forget. And then over time, we start to accumulate momentum in the practice. We start to get good at it. We start to find tools and low-hanging fruits that are just really good for us, that represent all four directions. So I could introduce the four directions right at the very beginning, because you have four direction, well, not you, but I've categorized things so that I can communicate. And one of the reasons is what I was starting to talk about before, is that I don't want to sell experience as if it's replicatable. I don't want to sell my enthusiasm. I don't want to sell that. You know, I can be enthusiastic about something, but I'm not trying to sell that to other people. I don't want to sell anything esoteric, that it's only this small group that can understand this infinite with no, people have had brushes with what we're talking about since the day that they were born. The reason it's so easy to understand is because we've seen it in ourselves when we were younger and as we grow up and things like that. So we do have some empirical evidence. If nothing else, we've seen it and felt it ourselves to a certain extent. So we know, you know, some of the aspects of this practice are tangible and in air quotes real. You know, they're real to us. We can do something with it. So I'm not doing that with this practice. This practice is technique. This practice is things that you can do, and that's what we're sharing. So that's what we're offering, is something that somebody can do. Now, I don't guarantee results. And when you get to hydrostasy, it's all about feeling. But I'm not going to tell you how it should feel. I'm not going to tell you what feelings emotional states, what things you're supposed to be finding as your lowest hanging fruit. I can't do that, but I can give the 4 directions, and the 4 directions lead to the space necessary to feel what can't be seen. And so that's the difference. The difference is I'm not selling the unseen, but I can show folks a method, an approach to experience that themselves. Does that make sense? And I haven't been offered that in my lifetime. Nobody's given me anything like that. Even Tai Chi is not given to me like that. So, the other aspects of the practice. So we have the basic mindfulness, we have counterbalance, we have warrior training, and then we have hydrostasy. This is when your lowest hanging fruit is super accessible. You have developed tools of attention that are they're not usually balanced yet, the 4 directions. Typically will rely on auditory or visual tools, or some people, maybe they were yoga instructors or dance instructors, so they're a little bit more in tune with the body. Maybe somebody has been practicing Wim Hof, so they're like, oh, breath technique, let me just run with that. So typically the four directions aren't balanced. That's what hydrostasy helps to do, is balance the 4 directions so that I'm not just relying on external points of attention. I'm not just trying to go fully in to where there is no out, and now I'm like imbalanced in my attention into the world. So that's really what hydrostasy is for. And then, of course, something that I have been very reluctant to talk about, but is a part of the practice, would be the hunting power or the behavioral change. Because one is no longer getting down on themselves at this point, they're not leaking power. And in hydrostasy, I introduce an element that's similar to karma yoga, only I can explain it better. And I can explain it without all the dharma and all of the morals and things like that that people want to debate. Because I operate under a theory, a premise, that it is the human psychology that creates some of the ways that we behave, such as anger, such as hate, such as physical violence on our own species. That's not a logical thing for a species to do. The only reason we would do something that illogical is because it's being driven by emotion. And when the human being is being driven by emotion and thought, we get a lot of what the world is today. So it's not a logical thing for a species to do, therefore I don't view it as natural. It must be coming through the lens of perception, which is our experience, our current psychology. The moment that we're in right now is all our lens of perception. This practice fundamentally changes that lens of perception, so that perception is going through a different lens, one that's more clear, one that's more balanced, one that's more empowered, one that's less easily swayed by outside factors that are trying to pull and drag on your attention. And then, of course, this practice will still be great in all of those areas of our life where there's challenges, because and it's not going to always make it perfect, but it will maximize. It's always better with the practice than without. And I think that's something that we can all agree on, is that when we're involved in a challenge, when there's physical suffering, psychological suffering, the suffering of other people, this practice, when well understood, will be far beneficial than in any type of habitual repetitive pattern and mindlessness. Would that be accurate? Do we agree on that to some extent?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that's just accurate.
Yeah. So one of the things that I talked about last week, as I start to talk more about hydrostasy. So a hydrostasy technique, what is that? I put my attention into my brain. And so what does that mean? It means I'm paying attention to my face, I'm paying attention to my head, and I'm actually directing my attention into the back of my skull through listening behind me. And here's an interesting thing, and I'm sure you felt it to some extent. When the mind is relaxed, there is a feeling. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that feeling should feel like, but do we still, in our own experience, do we agree that there's a different feeling when the mind is relaxed to when it isn't, when it's tense, when it's moving really quickly?
Yeah, to the yeah, I was going to say, to the extent that there's a different feeling between a clenched fist and an open, relaxed hand, that there's a different feeling between those two things. But it's more metaphorical than actual, but it's actual as well.
Yes. Yeah. And but so we do agree that there is an actual feeling involved with a mind that is relaxed. Now, to some extent, the relief is relative, but the relaxation is not. The relaxation can always be felt as relaxation, just like tension can always be felt as tension. Of course, when you're comparing the two and contrasting the two, then it's more apparent. It feels more apparent when we're comparing, because our brain loves context. That's the way that it operates. It loves that. So when we have more context, we feel it more, but space in the mind, a relaxed mind, has a particular feeling. So a hydrostasy technique is to create that feeling by embodying the practice and gaining some momentum with it, and then paying attention. That's one of the 4 directions. That's the cognitive direction. Remember, Jean, you took notes on the 4 directions. So when I say cognitive direction, I'm paying attention to my own cognitive space. So the fact that there's no running dialogue going through my mind is something I'm actively aware of. And then the moment a thought comes up, I'm actively aware of that. And then I choose what I want to do with that thought. Does that make sense? So that is just an example of when I talk about the cognitive direction of attention. A mantra. A mantra is a cognitive direction of attention. You're choosing that thought. There's all kinds of things that you can do with your mind, such as imagination. If you're imagining your environment, you're using your cognition to do that. You're using your brain. And so that would be one of the 4 directions. There's all kinds of things that we can do with our mind that would be one of the 4 directions. What makes it deliberate is that you're doing it on purpose with volition and intention. The best way to practice that is to intend it in advance. Today, I'm going to pay attention to that relaxed feeling in my temples. I feel it. I don't know what to tell you about it. I don't know the physiological nature of it. I'm not going to try to sell anybody relaxed temples. But with that said, I personally can feel the relaxation that occurs in my physical head, and I can pay attention to that. Incidentally, the more I start thinking, and if I start to go away from my practice, I can also feel it get more tense. And then before you know it, I'm like this. I'm like, wait, it's not even sunny outside. What am I doing? Like, why am I, crinkling my face so much? Does that make sense? And then of course we have the other directions, which is sensory perception. If I'm listening to Donna speak, that's one of the 4 directions. That's actually the exterior direction. Does that make sense? Because it's my ear function. We think that we're sensing the outside world, and we are, but our accumulation of it, the perception of it, the image that we create around what we're perceiving is but a little speck in the pond of what's actually there. And we know that. So we know that there's this whole unseen aspect to the human experience. I think what this practice
Which
does,
can also be felt because you are choosing, because you are practicing.
it can be felt. I would agree.
That can be felt also, yeah.
Yes.
When you are focusing on, in hydrostasy, this is with momentum.
Right.
This isn't something that without a history of practice I could even articulate. But when you are focused in one of the 4 directions, when you're choosing in advance or whether you're not, it becomes more attainable, more easily attainable in the realm of right there on the plate in front of you to choose to pick from, because I have practiced some form of doing that so much before. A formal practice, now that I'm in Tai Chi class again, and I'm doing some formal practices, not every day, but more often, then those things are more accessible to me when I am in a hydrostatic practice. They're more accessible to me when I'm in the space. It's not about relief tension and relief, tension and relief, although it is always some form of it. It's just, it's a lot. I'm not looking for relief. It's the moving away from relief, the introduction of some tension that reminds me that I'm not being as deliberate. I'm probably starting to coast.
Mm-hmm.
That has a feeling of tension to it. The pull towards coasting becomes more palpable because of those formal practices. I can be aware of my golden line. I can be aware of that relaxed space in my head. I can choose those things because I've practiced them before, and the feelings, it makes them more of low hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not something I could just start at that point. It has to be something that I've already experienced and been familiar with in order for me to use them as tools or practices in techniques, and because I know them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this practice would start to focus on formal practices more so. Like, I think it could be introduced at any point, really, because there's some things, this class is a formal practice. We do it in a particular way at a particular time on a particular day, and we all come together. This is formal. So we're doing a formal practice just by coming to the group study. So congratulations, we're doing a practice every week,
Yes, it has a very grounding aspect to it.
and there's momentum. The more that we show up, the more that we come to it, the more that it accumulates momentum. So we're seeing the principles even through a group study, because you should see the principles in everything. That's why they're principles. They'll show up in nature and in the way that we work and the way that we interact with other human beings. But there's also some aspects that, through hydrostasy and things that I don't talk about as much. For example, I'm just not as interested in the things that I used to be interested in, the things that the world is interested in. I'm just not. So if Gene came over and he's like, "Hey, Ernest, you want to go get a few drinks?" Sure, I'll go get a few drinks. I don't do that very often. I'm not constantly chasing entertainment. So the things that I do are a little bit different. And that was a challenge at one point that I had to kind of navigate, because people view that how they want to view that. They're like, "Oh, well, Ernest is a stick in the mud. He doesn't like to do things." And I'm like, "Well, I just go to bed at 8:30. So, if you're doing things at 7, I'm not going to hang out, because that's an hour before I go to bed. And I'm not great company at 7 p.m. I want to go to sleep. I want to start doing some of my self-care practices so I can get good sleep, because I care about that." That's just an example of something that I've had to personally navigate through this practice. And that's also where hydrostasy is coming from. What do we do, and how do we do it now that we have peace? Because that's not how we were doing things before, right? So once our mind is relaxed, we start doing things differently than we've ever done them before. And so I didn't have a playbook. I didn't have something that was given to me to say, "Hey, this is what to expect. This is what you can do. These are things that can help you navigate." I had to discover this on my own to a certain extent. And then together, we've discovered it as a lot of things together as a group. The 4 directions became super clear to me because Gene pointed out that visually, I have defocused vision, but that's different than I'm focusing on this and this. Or am I? And I'm like, "No, wait, I'm kind of just going back and forth." So that's an example of how the 4 directions became more clear to me because of this group and the discussion. So that's a principle. Why wouldn't that occur? Of course that would occur, because the practice is dynamic and it's built like that. So one of the aspects that could prepare a person for the last stage of this practice, which I call hunting power, which is something that can get very dicey if the mind isn't relaxed. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, I could give examples, but those were good examples in my books that I want to say for my books. But one of the things that has been super useful for me recently is the idea of karma yoga, but of course, I explain it differently. Actually, I explain it the exact same way. I just remove all of the jargon. I remove all the religious and all of the attempts to use it to control. But ultimately, the main thing about this type of approach to life and what I do and what we all do as individuals is that we start to remove some of the psychological baggage from our actions, from the things that we do. You know, Gene goes and plays tennis, or he goes and plays golf. You know, I'm going to be here, I'm going to go do my Tai Chi practice, or I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to go do that. What do we do with our mindfulness, with our peace, with uh and then also what do we do and how do we do it in a world that isn't operating on the same wavelength all the time? So one of the things that I've established as a part of this practice is learning just do energy, which is what warrior training was really designed to help a person create, is intention and willpower. And that they're so overlapping that there's no real, you're just doing, you're directing your attention and you're just creating. So a lot of what we do, we have the psychological baggage of expectations, how things should turn out, how things should look. Woe is me if it doesn't turn out how it's supposed to turn out, all of my goals and all of the things, right? It's the essence of karma yoga without all the jargon. Yeah. So it's basically, it's also technique. You know, there's more technique to it. I noticed I got a book on karma yoga. I threw it away. I'm like, this didn't give me any technique at all. All it did was talk about philosophy, ideas and speculations. And I'm like, this is worthless. This didn't give me anything to do with my attention that could help me understand how to enact karma yoga. So an example would be, I'm creating a website. Well, I don't want to get, and if I feel the psychological pull towards this needs to look a certain way, I need to yield a certain result, that's thought, that's psychology, and I can redirect that. And then the way that I redirect that is a lot of different ways. So one thing is that I'll always be creating something. I'll always have just created something, and I'll always have new ideas just waiting in the wings to create. I'll always be in all three of those modes at all times. There's no reason to get on this erroneous mind time scale of what I should be creating or what I should be doing or how I should be spending my time. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about hydrostasy is we get in our balance and then we explore in our balance. We don't have to go out of balance to explore and to create and to have relationships of value and to learn and then eventually to experience behavioral change that is more in alignment to who we are. You know, because before a lot of our behavior is a direct result of habit and conditioning. And it is the way it is. I'm okay with that. I'm sure you guys are okay with that. I've arrived with some programming. I don't like that word. I've arrived with some conditioning. I've arrived with some habit. And I have it right now, just like you guys do as well, because the brain does that. The brain wants to create habit because it's easier for it to keep you safe. At least that's how it works. It categorizes, it tries to organize, and it even tries to predict because it wants to be safe. It wants to know if I go out in a rainstorm with lightning, will I be safe? Well, no, chances are you won't, you know, or your chances increase that you won't at least. Experience the changes and not necessarily seek them. It's this, we start to get into this talking in circles where you seek without seeking, you do without doing. And it's like, that shit makes no sense. In the beginning, we're like, that makes no fucking sense. Well, it does, because I'm just doing. I'm just creating, but I'm doing it without all of the psychological baggage. That's what we mean by doing without doing. Seeking without seeking, because I guess semantically we are seeking something. If you're looking for something in your room right now, let's say you lost your keys, semantically you're seeking it. Like, I don't care, you're seeking your keys. Let's find a balance between that word and make harmony with it, right? But the thing is I have no psychological baggage as I look for those keys. So I'm just looking, you know, without seeking.
You're seeking in the present moment, however, you know.
Yes, yes. And I think the words, the way that we use them is we have a passive and we have an active. So like ignoring, you know, you can passively ignore something. The way to passively ignore your homework is to go play video games. Now, again, I can break it down. I can break down the dynamics that we're still just emphasizing. You're now emphasizing the video games way over the homework, so the homework takes a back seat in your psychology. So you're not actively, now if you actively ignore your homework, you're going to create emotion because you're actively paying attention to the homework that you're not doing. It's focusing on lack. It's focusing on what isn't getting done. And that is the common human tendency. So the reason that hunting power or behavioral changes last is because in order for it to be just based on mindfulness, the behavioral change, it can't have all that psychological baggage. Does that make sense? So maybe
You have to have practice behind it
you
to
have to have
know
practice
what
behind
that,
it.
you
Yeah,
have to know what that feeling is, you
exactly.
know?
Yes,
Sometimes I'm looking for my keys.
yes,
Many times I'm looking for my keys. And the tension starts to build because I've got to get out of the house. I have to be somewhere at a certain time, and I got to find those freaking keys. And then I try to calm a little bit and say, okay, retrace your steps and do all of those thinking things, all those thinking things. But with practice, I've learned that there's a couple of other things I have to do before I leave the door, leave the house. So I just stand in the room and I take a breath and I go to that space in my head that has nothing to do with where I have to be or what I have to do or the goals, or just get present. And then I go back to just do energy. And somehow I remember where the keys are, or then they're right in front of me, or it's just learning. But the point I'm trying to make is you need the practice behind you, for that to be a familiar place to be in your head, uh, to go to that part of your brain and know that, even just do energy is like that. You have to kind of have some practice behind you to eliminate the noise, to let to focus on be present, and the noise, so the noise will disappear,
yes.
and then clarity comes then.
Wait, well, the clarity, we'll talk about that later. That is, in my book, that's an enemy of knowledge, and I could talk about that later, another time. Again, we talk about
We
active.
might be just, it might just be a
It might be
semantics of
semantics. Yeah,
clarity
yeah.
in
What
this
do we mean by
instance, but
clarity?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because and it does sometimes come down to semantics, but there is a way that the human being looks at clarity, just like there's a way that the human being looks at knowledge that becomes a trap
Yes,
to both
yes.
of those, clarity and
But
knowledge.
the point I wanted to make was,
Yeah,
you can't skip steps.
can't
And
skip
Gene and
steps.
I have
Get this.
discussed this before. You can't skip steps, and I don't care, how smart you think you are. You
Yeah.
can't skip that. You can't skip steps because it doesn't have anything to do with intelligence. It has to do with practice,
Mm,
and it has to do with practice and
it
feeling
does.
it and knowing yourself in that practice. So you can't know what you're not doing if you've never done it. You don't know what you're doing and not doing if you haven't taken the time to practice and
Right.
and understand where the pull is happening, and where you can't practice something. You can't practice
Mhm.
hunting power without
No,
having, you can't skip steps to there.
you can't skip steps to there. And there's some reasons. It's not just, I'm not going to say philosophically, Gene, you can't skip steps. No, it is not mindfulness if you judge your own behavior. So if you're like, oh, I'm a terrible person, or Ida, we should be there, or we should be at this point, that is no longer mindfulness based. Do you see what I mean? So the moment we start leaking power, the moment we start judging the behavior, it is no longer mindfulness, and therefore it cannot be mindfulness based behavioral change. Mindfulness based behavioral change would be something a little bit different because we're present, we're mindful, and we're paying attention to how things feel. And the voice in our heads isn't necessarily positive. Cognitive behavioral change will use your words to redirect your behavior. And I get it. And I think it's fine. And I'm not going to tell anybody not to do it necessarily. As long as they are a qualified licensed professional, then by all means, go do some cognitive behavioral therapy. When cognition comes into play with hunting power, it's just to go back to the practice. Does that make sense? So when you use your voice of power, when you're doing the behavioral change, the behavioral practice, it's just to go back to your practice. It's not necessarily positive, it's not necessarily negative. It's a logical voice that points you back to presence, mindfulness, and deliberate attention. And then you just proceed from there. Does that make sense? So let's say I eat too much ice cream and I'm approaching the ice cream and of course I start thinking about it. I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to eat ice cream and damn it, I'm not, no, now wait a second. That's never gonna, that's not the way for me. I'm not gonna beat myself up. I'm not gonna declare war on my experience. I'm not gonna focus on what I'm not doing. I'm not gonna use the energy of denial, but I am gonna talk to myself logically. The ice cream that you're eating is out of balance, and if you can continue to eat this ice cream, it is going to equal suffering. You're not a fortune teller, so you don't know exactly what kind of suffering, but if you continue to engage an imbalance, it will result in suffering. And when that suffering comes, how you interact with that suffering could potentially create more suffering or not, depending on how you interact with it. This is just a fact. This isn't a judgment. So you see there's a difference. The voice of logic has started to interject, and it's like, Ernest, you can go ahead and eat the ice cream, but pay attention to how it feels. Pay attention to how it feels when you eat it. Pay attention to how it feels after you eat it. And then over time, the feeling starts to degrade the behavior. And the attention on the moment starts to highlight how often the habits are occurring. And you can slowly start to dissolve them all. And they kind of,
And it was a result of their practice.
and it's a result of the
And
practice.
that's the balance. I mean, listen, if you just learn tree pose in the
Yes.
most extreme position that tree pose can be in, I don't know, with your foot up against your thigh, like you're not going to learn balance without practice. And through the practice, you notice what it feels like when you're in balance and when you're out of balance and how you fall out of balance and how your foot is placed on the floor and what's going on in your mind and where's your breathing and where's your golden line. And you might not even say any of that with words. You can just track that. If you had no words for any of it, you can still practice tree pose. And it's all by practice that you learn balance. And that's exactly what you just explained. But not with tree pose. It's any
Right.
kind of balance requires the practice to attain the points at which you learn that you need to have in place to balance.
Yeah, I would say that I would just clarify just a point that we don't learn balance. We were born understanding what that is, but we have to learn how to balance in this weird world. I would say in an enlightened society, I put that in air quotes because I don't like calling it that, but a society that doesn't have all the psychological, baggage and all that psychological trash, they're very likely interacting with their experience and things much differently. So their balance is,
Right,
something they
but
probably
what
talk less about,
us learning balance in this world
learning how to balance.
shows us what things are extraneous and what things are not
Yep.
extraneous, what things interfere with the practice, what things are not needed in the practice. And
Yes.
that's, I mean, it's all the same. It's all the same.
It is all the same.
You need to
Yeah.
practice it wherever you're at with the totality of your understanding and your physicality. If you want balance, you have to practice it.
That's true. Yeah. No, I can't disagree with that statement one iota. And then especially because we're going to be acted on by an outside force, and that's called this weird world. So we're going to have to counterbalance, at least to some extent. That's why the hydrostasy circle, it's not static, it's moving. In fact, I create a circle to basically allow us to go a little bit left and to go a little bit right, but without going and existing in an extreme so that we lose our hydrostasy bubble, right?
Sure. It's like practicing balance pose on a boat.
Yeah, more difficult. So, but the principle's still the same, right? So one of the things I wanted to connect is the hydrostasy practice with the behavioral change aspect of the practice, which is the final phase of the bridge practice. And if you're doing this practice and you're allowing behavior to change, it also means that you're not predicting or focusing on any one behavior to change. Otherwise, you're violating the yoga, the karma yoga. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, Gene? So If I start to say, well, I need to drop this ice cream habit, no, I've just focused on the ice cream habit. That's not how it works. The way that it works is one day you're about to throw the towel on the bed and you're like, wait a second, I don't like how this feels when Shayna yells at me. I don't like how it feels when I lay into a wet bed. And I hate how it feels when I unconsciously, habitually do something like that. So I'm going to start hanging up my towel. Does it mean it's never going to end up on the bed ever, never, ever again? No, because that's a weird way to look at the world. But it has drastically reduced to maybe once every 2 or 3 years from every single day. Right? And that's just one example, from leaving the towel on the bed to telling lies. I pay attention to how I feel. And if a lie starts to come out, inner guru is, well, aren't you self-important? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, that's the only reason you would lie, is because you're afraid of something. You're afraid of how someone's going to view you. You're afraid that someone's going to leave you. You're afraid that someone's going to judge you. And so you're saying something that's not true. And I'm like, shit, that is all a violation of principle. I'm lying because of
I call
self-importance.
that the hey, look at this factor. Hey, look at that factor. Like my intention is to have less words in my going through my head all the time. So I know that you are using words now just to describe
Yes,
that to us, but there's a lot less words occurring when you do it. So you have a sense of
usually.
balance in your relationship with your wife, in your cohabitation with your wife. You have some sense of balance that you feel is desirable, and not throwing the towel on the bed, or throwing the towel on the bed disrupts that balance of cohabitation that you want to create. So when you go to do it, you feel the pull away from the balance that you have decided is desirable. And so you go, hey, look at that. And you notice momentum, and you notice under consciousness behavior. You notice and you go, hey, look at that. And then you put the towel in the laundry. So it's not about not throwing the towel on the bed. It's about achieving a sense of desired balance that you have determined, and your present moment practice has allows you the ability to feel when you're being pulled from it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm not leaking power. So remember, that's a prerequisite. But that's a prerequisite before warrior training. A person shouldn't enter warrior training if they're still leaking power.
You mean not leaking power in terms of there's no goal here. The goal isn't never to throw the towel on the bed
Oh,
again.
no.
The goal, the intention is balance.
No, I would say leaking power is getting down on yourself. Thinking
Oh,
thought.
I see.
Yeah.
That's why I call it the hey, look at that factor. When I notice myself doing something that would be undesirable to the balance that I'm trying to achieve, and I recognize it's fine. There's nothing wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong. I just am having an unconscious moment, or there's a lot of momentum associated with this. Or even when I get angry about something, I'm like, hey, look at that. Doesn't fit. And then I redirect, and then it dissolves. It's not about not doing it because it's bad. It says nothing inherently bad about towels on beds or ice cream. It's about it doesn't fit in the what I'm looking to expand and achieve for my own balance.
Yeah. And then also what this practice does, especially the way that we look at habits and habitual changes, is, sometimes people go from one extreme to another. They go from I am totally habitual to I will never have a habit again. I will be completely habit free for the rest of my life. And I'm like, well, now, no, wait a second. There is above your awareness and there's below your awareness, and your mind is fundamentally a habit creator. It wants to do that to keep you safe. It wants to do that to help invoke muscle memory, working memory, did I say muscle memory? Long-term memory. it wants to invoke those things. And in order to do that, it has to compartmentalize, it has to put things in boxes. So what I've done, and I got a little chill because I'm just so happy with myself. But I have created a way to approach behavioral change with the understanding that you will always have some behavior that could use some changing. Does that make sense? Without trying to change it, without focusing on it. It will present itself because
It
you're
makes
present.
perfect sense, and
Yeah.
and the more you practice, it's kind of like an onion peeling back. There's some that come up and you go, "Wow, I'm still
Yes.
doing that? Holy
Right.
mackerel, that's just really amazing." Well, yeah, maybe not after today, maybe I will, but I that just they surprise me. They
Mhm.
surprise me because I think I've tackled them all, you know? They surprise me when they come up, I go, "Oh, there's an under consciousness thing."
That's what clarity will do. It'll make you think that you got them all. You'll be so clear. You'll be like, look at me, I'm habit free. Oh no, you have the habit of thinking you're habit free.
And plus, since everything is changing and evolving, it gives you another opportunity. It gives you another opportunity to create something new and also to notice things that were under consciousness that you just, you know, the brain gets these patterns, these ruts in the road. So you go from A to E to L back to A, and you don't even know you're doing it. It's just like a bunch of synapses that happen because you have a rutted road in your brain. It's called habit and momentum. And there's so many of those we're not even aware of. uh, But as you're doing the practice, then you get those, hey, look at that moment. Well, look
Mhm.
what I was about to do, or look at like why or you go to say something like, I just couldn't help myself. And then you go, wait a minute, that's ridiculous. Of course I could help myself. There's no, just because everybody does it or everybody responds this way, or I've always responded this way, doesn't mean it has to be.
Mhm.
And I'm practicing all this time thinking I'm so advanced. And yet look at that. Look at what I was about to um, continue to do as a result of habit and momentum, and now I see it. So hey, look at that are in the beginning were an attempt for me not to judge myself, to just get away from judgment and keep moving forward, but now they're um they make me laugh because it's just part of being human.
It is. And that's what's great about this practice is it takes that into account. It removes the guru, it removes the deity, it removes the perfect person, and it's like, actually, I'm always going to be growing. I'm always going to be identifying things that have become a habitual pattern. And when those habitual patterns gain enough momentum that they're super unbeneficial, I'll feel it and I'll redirect it and I'll work with it. It will present itself. I'll navigate it in the way that I'm accustomed to practicing without labeling, judging, comparing, and trying to control and all of those things. And I'm like, oh, hey there, habit. You exist. Now that I know you exist, when I experience you, I'm going to remind myself even more of my practice. And then in that moment, I'm going to choose to reinforce the habit or not. But what's interesting is that you only reinforce a habit when you're unconscious. So if you're aware that you're doing it, you're actually now choosing to eat that bowl of ice cream. And then you'd be surprised if you start to choose it every single day, you notice that you're choosing it every single day. And now it's just so much more easier to identify and redirect and kind of navigate. And then before you know it, again, not a perfect person, but you're doing things that are more in alignment to the world around you. So, 6 techniques. The first 3 techniques are designed to create space in the overall amount of thinking, using thought to redirect back to the practice. And that includes basic mindfulness, that includes counterbalance, and that includes warrior training. So, those first 3 sections of the practice are just based around those first 3 principles, those first 3 techniques. The 3 techniques, the first 3, first is to come back to the present moment, establish, or in some cases, reestablish if you're counterbalancing, and then emphasize in your present moment, and then maintain emphasis. The way that we maintain emphasis is something that we call the rule of 3. That's how we keep coming back to the present moment when we notice that we've gone away. At this point, we have started to embody. Does that make sense? And we really start to focus on redirection back to the moment in warrior training. That's like super high on our list. We're still doing it with counterbalancing, but typically we're doing it when things aren't going well. That's typically when we're going to counterbalance because we're forgetting more than remembering. Typically we remember when we start to get to holy shit mode, or, you know, shit's about to hit the fan, or we're feeling terrible, or, you know, somebody's telling us about ourselves and we feel like telling them about themselves. And it's like,
Space
well, wait a
junk.
second.
Or space junk.
Space junk, or even space junk falling from the sky that we have to navigate. Yeah. So when we get to warrior training, though, now we're like, oh, this thought is about Ernest, redirecting back to my practice. Oh, I'm sitting here thinking about Gene all day. Well, that he didn't ask me to do that. So why am I doing that? Back to the practice. So we go from the traps of thinking to thoughts about self and other. Those thoughts are, it's a habit to sit there and think about yourself. It's called self-importance. The habit of thinking about other people, it's called self-importance, because you're thinking about them in relation to you 9 times out of 10. Does that make sense? And then that's warrior training.
Yes.
And then that's the first half of this practice with just those first 3 techniques. Now, the next 3 techniques are almost exactly the same as the first 3. The only difference is it's not coming back to the present moment. That was Neo. He's not happy. So the difference is
He
that
wants you to come back to the present moment.
no, she's probably brushing him, and he doesn't like getting brushed.
All right.
Yeah.
So the second 3 techniques are very similar to the first, except you're not coming back to the present moment. That's where you left off.
Right, because you're already there. So now, because you found your lowest hanging fruit and you're starting to remember all of the time, now you just start choosing with all of the stimuli. So let's say, Gene, you're really present today and the wind hits your skin. Well, you didn't choose the wind at the beginning of the day, did you? Not necessarily, but now that it's crossed your path, you can emphasize and maintain emphasis. And that's the second half of the practice. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what it really starts to get into is also the feeling. These myriad of emotions that I won't teach, I won't sell. They'll be different for everybody, but you can actually start to select exactly how you want to feel, emphasize that, and maintain emphasis. For example, the vacation feeling. That feeling of, like I can do it, I don't have to do it, it's whatever. You know, you can have that feeling while working. While working an 8-hour day, if you enjoy what you do, you can have a vacation feeling while doing everything that you're doing. So hydrostasy would also be choosing that vacation feeling because you can, not changing it because you're sad. That's different. That's not what I'm recommending. Does that make sense?
It does. You can choose the eager anticipation feeling. You can choose the being in love feeling. You can choose there's a whole bunch of them that you can choose because they really are states of mind and emotion and connection to the outside world. So it's a creative, to me, it's like painting a painting, but it's with your feelings and not with a paintbrush and paints. I don't know
Yes.
how else to describe that.
No, I like it. And then, you know, Gene pointed out something really important. Again, you can start to see the balance in everything in this practice. But some people say that how you feel should have no circumstances. It should require no circumstances. It should require. Now, okay, some things like my peace shouldn't require circumstances. I get that. But when I see a train for the first time, that's the first time I've ever seen a train, I'm going to get a very unique feeling about that maybe could never be replicated again, and I'm okay with that because that was the first time I've ever seen a train. Or maybe you fly, and every time you fly a plane, you get a particular feeling. Could you create that outside of flying? Maybe, but why not take advantage of it when you are flying? So Gene he said that perfectly. You're taking advantage of the circumstances in the world that presents itself, whether it's the wind. I love architecture, so when I see buildings, I'm not like, that is human creation, non-nature evil. I'm like, no, you know, some of it is a little bit misguided, like a lot of it's vanity. You know, we don't need the word Trump on the side of our tower. It would be fine without that. But I find a way to look at that tower and I still find the connection, the essence of the tower. because I'm taking advantage of the circumstances that present themselves. I'm swimming in the soup as it presents itself, and that's hydrostasy. Now imagine you're in that hydrostasy bubble and you're going about your day, and then all of a sudden the wind and the sun presents itself. That's in your bubble now. So you navigate with it, you move with it, you turn with it. And if you're doing that, there's not that much else I'm going to be able to offer a human being if they're doing that, other than a group study and new ideas and ways for us to continue to encourage each other, because we're being acted on by an outside force, especially and the outside force is just human momentum. It's not like it's this mysterious group of people who are like, we're going to make all of the humans our slaves. And I don't know about that. Maybe that's occurring. I put that on the island of maybe, I don't know. And then ultimately we look at this growth, the human potential to evolve and grow, and that is the behavioral change. The behavioral change is a constant growing practice where we take something from I didn't recognize it before to I recognize it now, not going to declare war on it, not going to turn it into a psychological problem, but it will balance itself out through the course of my mindfulness practice. It will drop when it's ready to drop. When I have enough energy, in a manner of speaking, I can just drop that, like smoking cannabis. I was able to just drop that, but maybe edibles, it's a little bit different. That will fall away if it feels imbalanced when it's ready to fall away. I don't have to declare war on it. I don't have to try to change my habits. So this is altering habits without trying to alter habits. And to some people, that would look like chasing your tail. That makes no sense. No, actually it does. If you're in the full scope of the practice, it does. That's why mindfulness-based behavioral change and behavioral therapy, it's only going to be presentable by somebody who are they themselves doing it. I don't think they would ever be able to sustain a person through that process without them also going through that process themselves. So whereas therapy and things like that, you can learn it and then teach it, this is different. You have to learn it and do it before you could ever share it with another human being, with authority, with authenticity, if that makes sense. And then the bridge practice is officially closed. Now, the great thing about the bridge is it's a system of practices. So you have the method. The method is what? Do you know? What's the method? The number one thing driving everything that we do. The number one thing, the method. Methodology drives everything. Do you know what it is? I hope so. What's the method?
Pay attention. Direct your attention
Direct your attention deliberately. Yes, absolutely. So we call it the golden rule of awareness. We call it the third pillar. We got a few different names for it, but bottom line, with intention, have you placed your mind into the moment? The answer is yes or no. If it's no, well, now it's yes, because you're asking yourself the question. So congratulations, you're on your way. So that method drives the 6 techniques. The 6 techniques are all a reflection of principle as well. Does that make sense? Principles like balance, principles like change, things like that. Principles of not trying to control and manipulate, stuff like that. Now, those 6 techniques drive the different sections, the different layers of the bridge practice, the bridge system. And under the system are all of the different practices, like fox walking. Fox walking is what I would say is a very beginner type of practice. It's probably something that's in between the foundational mindfulness and counterbalance. When somebody starts to really want to take it with them a little bit more, let's talk about fox walking. It could be a formal practice. It could be an informal practice. That's a great one to offer. The rings of power. That's another practice. I would say I would start offering the rings of power maybe in the counterbalance to the warrior training phase. That's when I would start to do that. Does that make sense? How we have these different practices
Does.
that align with the different layers of the overall system. Now, practices, Donna, infinite. Gene is going to have a practice, 15, 20 years from now. He's like, Ernest, this is this thing I'm doing with my mind. Tell me about it. Like, is this a practice? And I'll be like, absolutely. It has the 6 techniques. It reflects the method, and it's something that we've never really talked about. You've created a new practice. Bottom line. So the practices all go under these different layers, and we can have a lot of different, I have a lot of different practices. The 3 points of breathing, for example, the 4 directions of attention, mind gazing, things like that, adding acupuncture points to the body as you do everything else. That's almost a practice in and of itself. Do you see what I mean? Tai Chi is another practice of mindfulness. Qigong is another practice of mindfulness for me. So all of these practices are under one layer or another. If not a little bit of like the 4 directions, you could start that in the beginning. Paying attention, coming back to the present moment, that's one of the first directions, is your 5 senses. There's a way to start talking about that on day 1, but it is more a hydrostasy practice when you're balancing all 4, obviously, because you're maintaining 4 points of attention at once. And when you do, I don't have to teach a person about spirit. They're going to feel it. You're going to feel something, and it's going to be beneficial.
You know what's so wonderful is the transition from, in my practice, I'm just reflecting, is the transition from trying to achieve a goal, trying to get good at this, trying to work harder at it, to letting go of all of those expectations, to navigating, because it's fun and it feels good to do it, because it feels creative and it feels good to do it. It's not work anymore. It's not work that I need to remember, because the feeling of when I'm practicing and the feeling when I'm not practicing is so clearly, one is so clearly more desirable than the other, that the act of practicing is enjoyable and life enriching. It's not something that I need to do so that I'm no longer suffering. You know what I mean? It's not something conditional, like you said. It's not based on my circumstances anymore. It's based on a feeling that I want to have or not have. And another thing I noticed about when I embody that concept, which is, this is just much more desirable. This is life affirming. This is a life affirming thing to do with my time and my moments and my experiences, the way I want to live the moments of my life, regardless of the circumstances. This is what I choose because my time is limited here. And I want to emphasize what is life affirming. And is that when I'm doing that and everything is new and I'm experiencing things in a new way, because I'm evolving and the world is evolving, and so it's always new, is I get memories of childhood that I've never told the stories. You know, we all have our stories of childhood and the things that we remember, and it's not in that bag of stuff that I habitually would tell or recreate. Or those stories, they're completely different ones, and they're based on feeling. I remember the feeling of, when you said the train, if I've never seen a train before and then I see a train, it's going to have a certain feeling. That's that. When I'm practicing because I enjoy being in practice more than I enjoy being out of practice, my life is fuller because I'm practicing. I'm emphasizing what I want to emphasize in my experience. There are under consciousness memories that come up from childhood. They're very childhood. It's like the wisdom of childhood, the newness of life, the thrill of just little moments that I remember, that I recollect and retell. Recently, that's been happening to me a lot. It's not a story of my childhood that I tell anymore. It's just things that happen in my present that I can find a similar feeling from when I was a child experiencing something. Oh, both desirable and undesirable. that's what's happening as a result of my practice right now.
Hmm. The undesirable part does surprise me a little bit because typically, like, I start to speak of emotional memory in terms of state memory. So the reason that the emotional memory of a childhood event would come about is because when we're kids, typically we have less psychological emotional baggage. So when you're practicing, you have less psychological emotional baggage. So you're in a similar state to remember and to recall the feeling from when you were younger. So I call it emotional memory. I am surprised though
Yes,
that
and there is no stories. We haven't created any stories around it yet.
not
It's usually
necessarily.
the undesirable ones are when some adult usually invalidated my experience or told me what
Oh,
my experience was, and it was like, oh, is that what that story means? Is that what the moral of that story is?
oh, okay.
That's not what I felt. That's too bad. I believed the adults, and it was the undesirable was the programming that I
Okay.
got
That does.
that was counter intuitive to my experience
Mm.
and what I felt.
Like adults telling me that I shouldn't have an imaginary friend, that you shouldn't imagine.
Exactly
Yeah.
like
Okay.
that.
Yeah. That makes sense then. Yeah. But emotional memory is something that I talk about. That's definitely a hydrostasy topic that you're creating that space, you're creating a different state of being in every way, shape, and form. Vibrationally, emotionally, chemically, everything is a little bit different than uh, the way that it had been previously, what you would consider normal.
I just want to interject something here. I'm sorry if it's outside of the train of thought, but I'm very grateful for this group. I'm really very appreciative because one of the things that feels like a very connected space in my human existence since the time I was a child was having, I remember the friends, the children of my age that I was, my compatriots, or the people that were around me, no matter what age they were, who could lay on the grass and look up at the clouds, and we could talk about what is infinity? How could the sky never end? And if it doesn't end, how could that be? But if it ended, what would be on the other side? Like, those things that, that there was someone else to um engage in that conversation, that I wasn't alone in that experience. It wasn't just me and some adult telling me what I should be feeling or thinking, that I had people around me that I could talk about this stuff with. I find this group to be the equivalent of that as an adult in the world. So I'm appreciative of the group, and I'm appreciating you creating this space, Ernest, and sharing that very much.
You're welcome. And like I mentioned earlier, the practice has evolved because of this group, right? So even my current practice right now is a derivative of something that Gene said, something that he mentioned. And then other aspects of my practice are other things other people have mentioned, and it kind of helped me organize the information and put it
Well, of course,
into
I
a
think it's
format.
just intrinsic in the human experience that connection is sought, and
Sure.
that it is part of evolution. We are connected, and so when one of us evolves, we all evolve in some way, shape, or form. Um, a- and this group is a sub a subgroup of that experience, and I recognize it. I recognize it and I appreciate it, and it has become a formal part of my formal practice.
Me
So
too.
yeah, it's really wonderful.
Yep. Hosting the group study is a part of my formal practice every Thursday. It's important for me to do that to continue to gain the momentum from it. Yeah. And then if we stop doing it, I don't lose momentum necessarily, but I don't also gain it anymore. And then, over time, it is acted on by an outside force. We are acted on by an outside force. So I think that's why the group study has been so beneficial for us. And it is probably also true to some extent that those who are attending the group study are likely to embody it more than those who don't come to the group study. I know that people who don't come, they have reasons and times, and I get it. Um, but I don't know if they're embodying the practice or even trying to embody the practice or where they're at with things, because it's impossible to tell. I don't know, unless I have a one-on-one with them. And when I do have
There were
one-on-ones, 9 times
there
out of
were
10, they're not doing it.
there were times that we were meeting so frequently, like it
True.
was
Weekly or daily. Yeah,
da daily in some way, shape, or form.
that's
Yeah,
true. Yeah.
all hours.
Oh, so it was available. You're right. To some extent, this has been available to anybody and everybody. But the third pillar to a lot of people feels like work, and they don't really get past the counterbalance phase of the practice. We were at 3 times a week. I think even more than that at one point, right, Lisa? I think definitely at least 3 times a week. You're right. Yeah. So there's plenty of opportunity. It's just, we have to account for what we observe to a certain extent. And what I have observed is that the third pillar, the embodiment factor, feels like work to people. They only want to do mindfulness when things aren't going well. They only want their doctor when their stomach hurts, type of thing, rather than asking their doctor's advice just when they see them. That's like, hey, what's your advice? But yeah, so, and it's okay. It is the way that it is. For one reason or another, the idea of maintaining a point of attention that is intentional all day long feels like work to people until they get to what I call the event horizon. And Donna gave a perfect example of what that is today. She gave the very definition of the event horizon, when feeling present feels different than feeling not present, back in habit, because if you're not present, you're not like broken over like a broken robot. You're still doing shit. Like you're still going about your life. You're just doing it without intention. And intention feels different than unintention. And then when we start to choose the practice based on that feeling alone, pretty much, we've started to transition to where I think it's almost irreversible. You still have to do the practice for it to work. I don't want irreversible to sound like a magic trick or a pill. I'll be 110 years old and I'll be doing my 4 directions to some extent, or something new that I've created that I haven't talked about yet. So, and it's probably redirecting some habit that I've just created within the last 10 or 15 years. So it's always going to be that working thing, but there is a moment in this practice, and it seems almost like black and white, like we cross over, like it happens really quickly,
Like
where
the Wizard of Oz.
almost
Oh,
like the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, where you go from a black and white movie to an in color movie, and it's not because of a magic trick. It's because of the accumulation of momentum without leaking power. As that begins to gain momentum, it's like I can't choose anything differently and feel good about it. I have to maintain my
yeah, you know
practice.
what, Ernest? I think you've clarified event horizon for me, or maybe I clarified it for me. But it used to, my understanding of the event horizon was that when I was remembering more than I was forgetting, when I've gathered enough habit and momentum to remember to be present more often than I'm forgetting. And that's true. It's still true to some extent, but more so, a more further definition, a subtitle to the definition of event horizon is about the feeling.
It is
When
about the feeling.
it is just, I prefer to live my life deliberately with intent attention, than not to, because of the way that it feels
No,
is
that's really
so
interesting.
it's just, there's no, I don't have to justify it. I don't have to explain it. I don't have to convince anybody of anything. I don't have to. It's the way I prefer to live, and it and really doesn't always get received very well. Sometimes people are envious of the way
True.
I live, and other times people go, "What the hell is she doing? Like picking
Yeah.
up and moving out of state, away from your family, and
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like I miss my family at times. I have lonely moments. They're not as accessible, but I I am much more living from a feeling place than a thought place, and it's preferred over. It's preferred without question, without question, it's preferred, and no matter how it's received.
That's
That's
actually, that's the
that's
definition. That's
that's
not
a
a sub.
mental horizon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a sub definition. That is the definition. When the practice becomes desirable on a feeling level, when you feel it and it becomes more desirable than not doing it, because now you're working with your Freudian psychology. You're more likely to do something that feels good and that is enjoyable than something that doesn't feel good and that is unenjoyable. So the moment the practice like tips the scale and it becomes Freudian in our brain to where we prefer it, we prefer the feeling of presence, we prefer the feeling of volition in the moment and active attention. When we prefer that feeling, no matter where you're at in the layers of the bridge system, that is the event horizon, and everything is different from that point forward. And I don't think that there's any going back. I don't think you can go back at that. Maybe
It's
you
not
can, but
even just the feeling of preferred, but that's adequate for the definition. It's the feeling of I feel more genuine, authentic. It is the intention of my life purpose to live it present. Like why would anything else be chosen? Like it doesn't seem like I can choose anything else anymore. I can't, there's
yeah.
no other way. If I'm going to choose, of course I'm going to choose this.
Yes, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, so I will see you guys again next week on Thursday if you can make it. Any questions, comments, or concerns, just let me know. Things with Shen will be coming along as they come along. But yeah, so things are still moving. It's just moving at a pace that I feel comfortable with. Yeah. Okay, so I will see you guys again Thursday for sure. If we start our book study, I'll let you know. We might start doing a book study of The Voice of Power, but yeah. What'd you say, Lisa?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a webinar on Sunday?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna do a webinar on Sunday. Yeah,
What time is it?
I don't know. What
Oh,
I
okay.
yeah, I don't know. I'll look at it and see what time we can do it. But basically I'm also going to be testing the space because I'm going to start doing webinars through Shen. So we'll test the space, we'll talk about some stuff. It'll be fun. Okay. And I'll put the time in today, so we'll decide on a time some point today. All right, I'm gonna go stretch and stuff. I will see you guys again soon. Thanks for hanging out, and I appreciate the discussion. Bye, everyone.